Hi crafters! So today what I'm going to show you guys is how to paint a vinyl stencil to a piece of wood. So what you're going to need today is you're going to need your stencil, obviously. So we cut this stencil in the last video that I posted just a couple days ago. So if you need to know how to cut a stencil out of vinyl using your Cricut machine, go check out that video. You're also going to need some transfer tape to get your stencil onto the wood. You're going to need some paint. I'm using this Artist Loft Level 1 acrylic paint from Michaels. You're going to need some paint brushes. I like to personally use these foam brushes, and then I like to have some little brushes on hand just if I need to do any touch-ups. Some scissors because just in case you need them. A scraper tool, your weeding tool just in case, and a measuring tape to measure where you want your stencil, and a pencil to make some marks. So let's get started. So this wood is just a piece of wood I think I got from Home Depot. It was in their paneling section, so they just have some sheets of wood. This one's a really thin piece, so I thought this would be a nice piece to like lean on a mantle or something like that. So first things first, so we have our stencil here, so we're going to need to take our transfer tape and put it on the stencil to get the stencil onto the wood. I am using, I believe this is Oracle transfer tape. I like the Cricut one too, but I like this one because I can get it in bulk. I think I got like a 50-foot roll off of Amazon, so I use this quite a bit. So we're going to want to take our transfer tape off, and I'm going to save this scrap because that's what I'm going to put my paint on later. So we're going to put our our transfer tape onto our stencil, and you're going to want to make sure you get this on in one foul swoop, because if you mess up, it's really hard to peel it back up without ruining your stencil. So I usually like to start in the middle and then work my way out. So I'm going to scrape this down to make sure it picks up my stencil nice. My boyfriend is out getting his sushi right now, so I'm hoping I can get this done before he gets home. So I'm going to trim off this excess vinyl here. See, I told you these scissors would come in handy. Just from the tops here, I want to just trim this just a little bit. I obviously didn't really measure my transfer tape. So now we're going to want to peel off the transfer tape and the vinyl. Sometimes I use my weeding tool to get it started. It's a little stubborn sometimes. So we're going to peel off our transfer tape. I like to flip it over. I think it makes it easier. So if your stencil is sticking to the paper, don't worry. You just got to be patient with it a little bit and just kind of work it back onto the transfer tape just to get it going a little bit. That's one thing I've really learned with crafting and using this Cricut, just generally, just being patient takes the fun out of it if you just get frustrated. I mean, trust me, I get frustrated and I use a lot of cuss words. Just ask Joe. I've cussed and cried a lot over the last last 6 months, almost a year I've had my Cricut. So it's been a journey, but it's been fun. So we're just taking our we're taking our backing off of our stencil. I originally got my Cricut to literally do one thing for my best friend that was getting married. I was making her some champagne glasses, and I bought my Cricut and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna bust all these champagne glasses out. Yeah, anyone that has a Cricut knows that that absolutely did not happen. I was on YouTube for probably like 3-4 hours, and probably a couple days after that trying to figure out what the heck I got myself into. Alright, so now we have our stencil onto our transfer tape. So we're ready to go. And actually, I forgot to measure this to see where I want it, so that was bad on me, but I'm just gonna lightly set it there for just a second. I'm not gonna smooth it down just to see where this is gonna go. You know, I really felt like I was missing a step, but that's pretty spot on actually. I can just move this over a hair, and then it's about 3 inches, so this can move up a little bit. And honestly, I really don't go for perfection when I'm crafting. I just want it to look nice. So I don't try to beat myself up over if it's like a 1/2 inch to one side or not. As long as it looks good and my customer, whoever's buying it or whoever I'm giving it to is happy, that's fine. So now we have this where we want it. And now I'm gonna smooth this down to the wood. And I like to start in the middle because it's easier to work your way out. So we're gonna smooth this down, make sure we can get all the air bubbles out while it's under this transfer tape. We don't want any bleeding, so we want to get this down as smooth as possible. All right, so I think that's pretty good. So now we're going to take our transfer tape off of our stencil. And again, you want to do this not at a snail's pace, but a little slow, because you want to make sure that the stencil doesn't peel up at all or get too many bubbles. And that's kind of, I like to put my hand here, you know, on the transfer tape as I'm pulling, because I feel like it kind of smooths it out as I'm going. I don't know if that actually does anything, but I feel like it does, so I'm just gonna go with it. All right, so we can get rid of this transfer tape. Now I'm gonna just go back and just make sure it's all smooth, and be careful doing this without the transfer tape over it because you don't want to snag any of these little pieces in here. We just want to be gentle, but we don't want any bleeding either. So now the fun part, we're going to start painting. So let's get a piece of scrap paper. And we can put some paint on there. So I'm using this Artist Loft level 1 acrylic paint. I got this from Michael's. I like this paint because I feel like I only need a coat or two. I don't need to put too many coats over it, because I know sometimes acrylic paint, it can be kind of see-through. So this one I really like. I think it's pretty solid. So I'm just going to throw some paint on there. Take my foam brush. So first I like to start out with a relatively dry brush. So I'm not putting too much paint on here, just enough to kind of coat it, because I'm not going to Mod Podge this. And I know some people like to put Mod Podge on, and I love Mod Podge for other things, but I've noticed that with my painting, it tends to, when I peel the stencil off after I've painted and there's Mod Podge under there, if the Mod Podge is too dry, or if it's dry generally, it's going to peel my paint off of the wood, and it just looks really messy, and I don't like it. So I'm not going to Mod Podge, so I just need to be very patient. So we're going to start painting this. Again, I don't have too much paint on here. It's kind of a dry brush. So I'm just going to go over it. And we're going to go over this again. So if it's looking really like light and not solid, don't worry, we're going to go over this again. And this is just how I've had luck with my wood signs, so this is not the hard and fast rule by any means. This is just how I kind of like to do it. It's so nice I can come home from work and just paint. It's very relaxing. Well, as long as everything's cooperating, it's relaxing. If nothing's cooperating, then it's very stressful. All right, so now we're going to do this together part. Again, just a little bit of paint on here just to get it going. Because you can always add paint. It's, I mean, obviously impossible to take it away. And you don't want to touch it up too much after, because then you get rid of those crisp lines that you worked really hard for. All right, so now it's pretty much covered. So now I'm going to go back with more paint. I'm going to go over this again, a little more solid this time. And I'm doing brush strokes. I know some people like to dab, and that's fine too. This is, again, just what has worked for me. So we're just going to go over. It's so nice once you peel the sign up or the stencil up, and there's like these nice crispy lines. So it's always a bit of a gamble. Again, it depends on the wood you have. It depends on the weather, you know, if it's humid, if it's dry, if it's hot or cold. It's very, most of the time you can pretty much predict what you're going to get, but sometimes paint, vinyl, wood just has a mind of its own, kind of like our Cricut machines. Just sometimes it just does what it wants, and it does not care if you have a client or a deadline. It just kind of does what it wants. All right, so I'm gonna just make sure. I will like to peel the stencil when it's wet, so I'm just gonna go over this again one more time, just a little bit, just to make sure it's wet. I do not like to peel a dry stencil or once the paint's dry, because then the paint is going to peel or crack or just not give you those crispy lines. So, all right, so I think that looks pretty solid. So now is the moment of truth. We are going to peel this. So we're just going to peel slowly, gently. We want crispy lines, so I'm not going to force anything. If the stencil rips, that's fine. I can go back with my weeding tool later. Sometimes I end up with this huge piece of vinyl, and it's kind of difficult to work with. All right, so now I have paint all over my hand, and now we could just go in this and just weed it gently, because again, we don't want the paint to chip or to peel. Just be patient with it. And you know, honestly, sometimes if the paint peels or chips or whatever, just make it rustic. Like, who cares? Just make it look rustic and sand it a little bit. That's in right now anyway, so it's fine. My weeding tool just did that, but that's okay. Okay, so another thing just to watch for. So if your weeding tool gets paint on it like mine did, it's going to leave, now I have paint on my hands, I'm just making a mess, but it's gonna mark your wood. So just be careful about that. But the nice thing with acrylic paint is it's water soluble, so sometimes what I like to do is I'll take like a Q-tip or something and I'll just kind of work around these little areas that got a little bit of white on them. It's not that big of a deal. All right, so now you have a beautiful wood sign that you can either sell or give to somebody or hang in your own home. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. If it was, give me a like, leave me a comment, subscribe. Also, follow me on Instagram. It's at @thecraft_scraps. And I hope to see you in my next tutorial. Happy crafting!